Started.
Sorry, I just was I clicked the wrong recording button, so we're good now.
That's fine. That's fine. Thank you, Leah. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome. It's great to see all of you, see your faces. Welcome to today's Colorado Theater Guild workshop, Deconstructing Dialects, a toolkit for actors. I'm Abner Genesee, and I chair the CTG workshop committee, which aims to share content that celebrates and supports the Colorado theater community. We acknowledge the native lands of the Oceti-Sakowin, Ute, and Cheyenne people. And today's workshop is scheduled for 90 minutes. It is being tech supported by our own Leah Kozach. And kindly turn your cameras on, and if you would, turn your microphones off at this time. And you can please put your questions or your comments as you have them. I'll be monitoring the chat room, but go ahead and put them in the chat, and we will do our best to address each and every comment, each and every question, either during the workshop or at the end, which will be our main Q&A session. We're grateful and excited to welcome our speaker today, Ms. Jenny Thomas, the voice coach, who is an instructor at the Denver Center of Performing Arts and also instructs privately. Jenny, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Abner. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Am I sounding okay, Leah?
Yes, we can hear you fine. The video is still lagging a little bit, but I think it'll be okay since we're mostly going to be on the PowerPoint until you're all finished with that. But we can hear you crystal clear.
Okay, sounds good. All right, well, thank you, everyone. Yeah, Abner pretty much told you what you need to know about me, but I've been doing this for 25 years, and I've been at the Denver Center for a very long time teaching. I was teaching voice and speech for many years, character voices, dialects. That's kind of my current jam. And then also teaching privately around town with all of those things, including a little bit of singing and all of that. So I originally started out as an opera singer. I wanted to train as an opera singer, and so that's kind of my background. And then I went and studied at the National Theater Conservatory, which is now defunct. Unfortunately, that was at the Denver Center for the Performing Arts. And so that's where I got my degree, a master's degree in vocal coaching and training for the theater, and just kind of been teaching ever since and doing all that, and really love being in the Denver area. So let's get started then, Leah, and I will teach you all about how to do a dialect. There's a process to it for sure. All right. So the first question is, what is the difference between a dialect and an accent? And that is a question that is often asked of me. As far as I'm concerned, they're one and the same. But technically, a dialect is a variation of a language. That could be English, that could be French. So a variation of the English language is British English or Brooklyn English or Australian English or Jamaican English. That's the variation called a dialect. So it's spoken by the native speakers of that language, and the vocabulary, the phrasing, the pronunciation is what changes to call it a dialect. But it is mutually understandable. I think that's kind of the point, is that you can more or less understand each other. You can't always say that with everything. Sometimes you're you're wondering, what did that person just say? But more or less, if you're speaking in the same language, then that's what that means. An accent is if it's a non-English speaker, if in the case of English, and of course in the theater it is, because we're always going to be doing it in English most of the time. And so the accent would be the character who is not a native speaker of English, who has an accent when they bring their language into their English speaking. So Swahili would be an example, German, Chinese, Ukrainian. So that's where you would get that difference. Like I said, I call them dialects and accents. A dialect is also an accent as far as I'm concerned. I will use them interchangeably and say dialects and accents, but if I'm saying dialect, I also mean accents. I hope that's not too confusing, but for ease of use, that's kind of the way I do it. Okay, next. So the voice, even just speaking not in dialect, has elements that you can break it down. You can break it down into elements which become the vocal identity of the dialect or the accent. And so how do you identify a dialect or accent? What are the unifying parts that tell you that it's that accent or that dialect, right? And this is what I call the elements of the voice. And it's specific categories that it's kind of the agreed upon element or category that tells you you're talking about British RP or you're talking about French, about that dialect. And it's very, very general. So they're what I call 7 core vocal elements, which are focusing on resonance, inflection, rhythm, and articulation. And 4 supporting vocal elements, focusing on culture and character as they specifically relate to the dialect. Okay, next. So let's look at these 7 core vocal elements of a dialect or accent. It is a continuous kind of, well, I don't want to say circle, but a world of the voice that you can desegment or deconstruct into parts of the voice, but it is one thing, okay? So you have the space, which, you know, we'll get into this in a second with the more detailed descriptions of all of these, but the space is the shape of the cavity. You have the sound, which is the resulting sound from that cavity. You have the tune, which is the melodic expression. Then there's the flow, which is the rhythmic manifestation, expression. The form, which is the overall articulation and tendencies around articulation. And then specifically the shapes and the connectors are the vowels, diphthongs, and consonants. So next. So we'll start with space, the vocal tract configuration. All right, so any dialect has to have a theme around what the vocal tract is doing. And the vocal tract is basically a cavity of air from your larynx to your lips, from your lips to your larynx. Everything in there where the sound vibrates is the vocal tract. And so what's going on in the vocal tract? You may wonder and say, well, nothing's going on, but of course, when you speak, you're changing the shape constantly. The tongue is moving, the lips are moving, the jaw is moving, there's resonances bouncing off the back wall of the throat and going up into the nasal cavities. So there's a lot going on, and looking and feeling and experiencing what specifically the space is doing when you are speaking a dialect will help you hold on to the dialect. That's why I like to teach this, because it's something you can grab onto. It's like a formula. You can say, if I know how to hold my tongue or my mouth, and if I know how to keep it there, then I can keep that dialect and stay in that dialect. Okay, so it is created, though, through the shapes and the connectors, which are the vowels, diphthongs, and consonants. So because of those words and word changes, that's how you're going to get that space. So it's a circle, and it kind of all feeds back into itself. And I'll mention that again when we get to the shapes and the connectors description, just to illustrate how this works. Okay. So some examples would be with open space with British RP. So the space inside with British RP is very open and resonant because of that openness inside. That's why you have the spaciousness and openness, the feeling of that with British RP. Another example would be with Minnesota. So that would be a closed space because it's very nasal, right? And that's because the space in the mouth is very limited. And so the sound is going to go right up into the nose. Okay, so that's significant for those two dialects. In order to maintain them, having those that very specific formula will help you maintain them. All right, next. So the resulting sound from the space is the vibrational resonance of that sound, of that space. So I like to separate them because just because you have a certain shape in your mouth or space doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have the same kind of sound come out. So we can't say, oh, this is the space you're going to recreate for British, but what's the sound that comes out? You need to know what that is too, and so that you can have both of those pieces to it, both of those elements. It is a unique quality, a tone, or a timbre. It's like the placement of the sound. If you were to place your sound somewhere in your front to back, up to down, it would be a placement you could literally think of putting the sound to be able to recreate that each time. So it gives its overall timbre, overall sound character. Nasal. So if I'm nasal, I'm talking up here. If I'm throaty, it's kind of like I'm swallowing. Maybe it could be down here. This is more like for a character, not necessarily for a dialect. Hollow would be kind of back in there. Breathy, of course, very breathy with the sound. And balanced would be a combination where you're really using lots of air and balance. So examples of nasal would be Brooklyn Jewish, where you're really nasal for that one.
Jewish.
Yeah. And throaty for Russian, it's very much in the back. Hollow for Irish. So in Irish, it goes from the back to the front, and it has kind of a tube opening from back to front. And so that has a hollowness to it. Then the southern, soft southern, it tends to have a breathiness. I'm overdoing it. It isn't strictly breathy, but it has that tendency. And so that would be an example of something a little more breathy. And then back to the balance of the British RP, which is very resonant and rich. Okay, so that's kind of cycling through the sound qualities that you can have with different dialects. Okay, next.
In and of itself. In and of itself.
Okay, then next we have tune, which is high-low pitch variation and melodic range. So the melodic range will fluctuate relative to a median pitch center. Median meaning not necessarily middle, because sometimes median is on the low side, sometimes median is on the high side, but it's more around which there's a tendency to rotate. The pitch may rotate around an area that's kind of the base point where it always comes back to. So that's kind of what median, it's like more commonly where you come back to that area. Here I am speaking in General American, and what you'll find is if I switch over into British, did you notice how the median pitch raised? So I'll go back down to General American. If I were to speak in that same median pitch in American, it would sound like I'm a little bit excited, right? So I'm going to go back down to my median pitch in General American, and then I'm going to change into British, and the median pitch goes up. Do you see if I switch right back over to General American in the same median pitch as British, it's too high. I'm hyper. Okay, so that kind of gives you an idea of the difference between those two dialects as far as the median pitch. There's also a melodic identity that comes with the tune of, the expression, and that can be categorized as either major key or minor key. So major has large leaps in pitch change, minor has small leaps. Okay, so for instance, major key, once again, is the British RP. There are large leaps where I jump high and then I jump down low. And that's considered a major key. If I were doing the soft southern, that would be a minor key, because there's less leaps involved. There's much narrower range. That's considered a minor key. Okay, and so we talked about the median pitch with British, and it's also a major key. General American is considered, I don't know, I would call it maybe a minor key, but it's kind of partly major and partly minor. So, I mean, we're comparing pretty much everything we do here to General American. Okay, so keep that in mind, is that when I say something is lower or higher or more nasal or more breathy, it's generally in terms of General American. So, all right, next. Okay, so next we have the flow, which is the rhythm. Now there's three major pieces to flow. The pacing, so how fast or slow you go, the overall rate of speed or the tempo, the speech rhythm, which is the overall character of the rhythm. Is it smooth? Is it choppy? Is it bumpy? And I like to use subjective, intuitive words to describe the dialects, because it helps people, even though it's not a scientific way to look at it. Dialects are not really a science. It's a real person thing. It's real people who speak these dialects and these accents. And so intuitive wording such as bumpy is helpful, because we all kind of agree on what the word bumpy means, and we all kind of feel what bumpy is. So if you describe something as bumpy, you're going to feel bumpy, and it's going to be semi-universal. So that's what I tend to do when I describe these dialects. So that's kind of the idea of the speech rhythm. Word stress is literally stressing a specific word or a specific syllable or a word in a phrase. And the word stress is significant from dialect to dialect, because some people will stress a word more specifically over using pitch. So I'll give you an example with General American and British RP. So with British RP, the stress is really more on the pitch. So if I'm stressing a word like I just did, I'm really continuing the flow and I'm not really interrupting it. But if I'm doing it in general American, I will stress a word and I kind of land on it hard and there's more volume and there's more emphasis. Whereas in British RP, it just keeps going and you jump up high and then you keep going. So word stress in British has to do more with pitch than with volume and length and that kind of thing, which you'll find in general American. So some other examples would be with Cockney. So if I'm doing Cockney, it's really smooth, but then it's bumpy. All right, so you have a combination of smooth and bumpy. All right, so you're not going to always have one or the other. You'll often have combinations. But in Irish, Irish has a very smooth quality to it. So it's very typical. Certainly there's a little bit of rhythm in there, but mostly it's very smooth. And then on the other hand, you got the Brooklyn, the Italian version, which is very choppy. It's very disconnected, very, very much like that. Okay, so you do have some extremes, but of course, in any dialect, there are going to be some exceptions. There are going to be subtleties. So, okay, next. Okay, the form. This is the overall articulation tendency. So with form, you want to think, this one is the hardest one necessarily to pin down because it's not always crystal clear what exactly is going on. But I like to think of this as one specific element because you think of it in terms of what are the sound changes going on that is a generalization. All right, so for instance, if you're talking about what the lips are doing, what the jaw is doing, what the tongue is doing, does the jaw tend to be very active? Are you dropping it a lot? Are you using it a lot? As in a very common, I don't even know what the characterization would be called, but it used to be called Valley Girl. It's like Valley speak, where you're talking like that and the jaw is very active, right? So that's what I'd call the form of a very active Valley speak, okay? What's happening with the tongue in the dialect? Is the tongue incredibly active? Is the tip of the tongue involved a lot, as it would be with Italian and Spanish? And is the back of the tongue involved, which it would be in Scottish with heavy L sounds, right? And then the lips, are the lips rounded a lot? Are they tense to the side? Like in the Minnesota, we got a lot of stretching and that kind of tension there. Same thing with, is the jaw tense sometimes? And this is tricky because I don't want to tell actors tension. I don't want to say tense your jaw because that's really bad. But tension is a thing. And so the words that I try to use are things like firm or held or maybe taut. But I do mention tension in terms of relativity, that you have to know what is tense and what is relaxed, because it is something that you do have to be aware of. You can't always just, not everything is going to be relaxed and easygoing, obviously. Okay, so the actions of the lips and the jaw and the tongue are determined by the vowels and the consonants, the shapes and the connectors. And so, we're getting close into the circle, these are the core elements, but the last two are the shapes and connectors. And so if you think of it, is that each one is dependent on The outer circle is dependent on the inner circle, and the inner circle is dependent on the outer circle. So I also want to mention the soft palate, the degree of flexibility in the soft palate. Okay, I want everybody to yawn right now and see if you can feel your soft palate engaged. If you're yawning, you'll feel it stretching. Okay, now what I want you to do is yawn while counting out loud. And I want you to notice where the sound changes as you're counting. So I'll do it 1, 2. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start to yawn and I'm going to count out loud. And I'm going to keep counting out loud as much as I can through the whole yawn. It's kind of tricky, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. You see, so it changes and it becomes a little bit, I don't know, there was a little point where it was nasal, there was some point where it felt kind of balanced, and then of course it got really hollow and almost stuffed up. And so the movement of the soft palate in to varying degrees, the flexibility of it, the tension, the relaxation of it is going to be a huge in the vocal tract as well with that dialect. And then just note that this determines the space from the very beginning. We were talking about space. What happens with form determines what happens with space and vice versa. Okay, so in Irish, you're going to have a stretched and rounded space. And the form of that is that you're stretching, like sometimes you're stretching the cheeks and you might be rounding the lips, but you have a little bit of both going on. So, ah, oh, and those are kind of some extremes that will happen with Irish where you have a lot going on in the form. And then with the soft Southern, it's what I would call lazy. And I only mean that in terms of what physically you're feeling when you're doing that soft Southern is there's not a lot of activity in the jaw and there's not a lot of activity in the lips. So that kind of gives you, and now suddenly when I speak in a general American, all of a sudden there's more activity. So you can see how that form changes from dialect to dialect. Okay, next. You having technical difficulties, Leah?
We're seeing the shapes here.
Yeah, I wanted to go.
So Jenny, I can see the shapes thing. Are you able to see the shape slide?
I can only see form.
Okay.
And I wonder if that.
Let me go back. There's the form slide, and now we're back to the
Okay,
shape slide.
Yes, there's
So-
shapes.
Okay, so I think it might just be an internet lag with, because you were saying there was
Okay.
another meeting going on.
Yeah, if that happens again and you're wondering what I'm doing, that's probably what why I'm not saying anything. That's probably why.
No worries.
So I'll ask again and make sure. Okay, sorry about that, guys. So now it brings us to the shapes, the vowel and diphthong sounds. This is what most actors think about when they think of dialects. They think about, okay, what sounds change? Let's say, how does what does the ah turn into in this dialect? What does the e turn into? But this is only just part of it. This is the core of the core of what needs to be worked on with a dialect. Now the vowel sounds, are voiced, they're pure, and they're a single articulatory position. I want everybody to try this. I want you to do just the simple vowel ah. So everybody, ah. And in order to do an ah, you have to voice it. You can't whisper an ah. You have to say it. You have to voice it. Ah. It's pure. It's one position. And it's one shape inside. Ah. Okay. The diphthongs, however, are also voiced, but two vowels that are kind of blended into one shape and then another shape in succession. So if you say oh, so everyone say oh, you start in one position and you end in another, and it blends together. So oh. What you will find in a lot of dialects is you'll have diphthongs in General American may turn into pure vowels in the dialect and vice versa. So you would have in, for instance, let's see, to, T-O-O in General American is a pure sound. In Irish, it's a diphthong, two. It's actually a triphthong, two. So you've got different changes, and understanding what's a pure sound and what's a diphthong or even a triphthong can be very helpful when going from dialect to dialect. And then you'll also have the opposite. So where our diphthong would turn into a pure sound. So if you have let's see, what was the one I wanted to use? O becomes O in so many dialects. So like, let's say in Scottish, you would say home in General American, and in Scottish it would be home. Okay, or in Irish too, it would become a pure sound. So again, these sounds change in comparison to General American, so we're always using General American as our kind of solid ground, and then veering off in any direction is the dialect or the accent as it compares to General American. Okay, so here's some more examples. With Scottish, you're going to have lid equals lid in General American equals lid. So it changes from an I to an E. Okay, and it happens to be a pure sound to a pure sound. Then British RP would be, we say ask, they would say ask. And just a note, I keep talking about British RP, if in case you don't know, most actors do, but just in case, RP is received pronunciation, which is the high class educated version of British that actually is no longer really truly in existence. It is a made up dialect that was created in the 9th class, and it was certainly a you know, I mean, it's still used to some very, very small degree, but mostly only in period plays and movies. So just so you know that that's what I'm talking about when I'm doing British RP, because the current modern version is estuary, and that's kind of a catch-all. Estuary English is a catch-all for sort of modern London or modern, I don't know, it's kind of a blend of Cockney and British RP. And you're going to hear across the board people from all different ranges of ethnicities. And I mean, it's so, so different than this British RP that you need to learn for George Bernard Shaw or something like that. Okay, next. Okay, so I don't, yeah, there we go. All right, and this is the final of the 7 core elements. the connectors. And last but not least, because you cannot have words without consonants. The consonants are your intelligibility. And so that's why this is at the center of the circle. Consonants are voiced or they're unvoiced. Okay, and there are two or more articulators restricting the airflow in varying degrees. So if we look at some voiced consonants in General American, everybody repeat after me. You've got b, 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 d, 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 j, 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 and z, z, z. And those are all voiced, meaning the larynx is working and vibrating and buzzing when you say those consonants. Unvoiced examples are p, 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 p. And if you do it without a vowel behind it, it'll just be air. P, 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 p. T, 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 t. Ch, 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 ch. S. Those are unvoiced because the larynx is not working in those with those consonants. And this is very important with dialects because sometimes, very often, voiced consonants will become unvoiced consonants in the dialect. You get this a lot in Irish. So ending voiced consonants like head, for instance, when you say in General American, the D at the end of head, it's going to be head, head. It's going to turn into a T in Irish. And so very, very characteristic of that. Now, rarely are you going to have the reverse happen where an unvoiced consonant in General American will suddenly be voiced, but it does happen. Let's see, let me think of an example. If you're saying, yeah, there are some examples and I can't think of one right now. I think maybe some Spanish, there might be something, but if it comes to me and if somebody can think of one, let me know. But right now it's rare. It's much rarer than the previous example would be. Okay, and then again, in comparison to General American, it's all revolving around General American. And when I say General American, I want to make clear too, General American is exactly what I'm speaking right now. And it is what the vast majority of, well, let me take that back, that most people speak General American if they are, let's say that a person who speaks General American, they're from the South, but they're trying to maybe soften their accent a little bit. That's kind of where you're going towards, is that General American. There isn't really a agreed upon standard for General American. There sort of is, but it's not like you would have with Parisian, for instance, or standard French or standard German. There's so many different standard languages across the world. General American is more that kind of agreed upon neutral American. And so that's what I'm talking about when I talk about General American. There's no right or wrong to it. It's just a neutral way of speaking. It's just, again, kind of an agreed upon lack of a dialect. And that's what we talk about when we talk about that. Standard American, on the other hand, is kind of the equivalent of British RP. It is archaic. It is no longer spoken very rarely, and it is used on the stage and in film. It is the language of Shakespeare, and it is the higher, if I were to speak in Standard American, this is Standard American, and it just sounds very stagey, doesn't it? So we don't speak in Standard American anymore, it's General American. Okay, so some examples of some other consonant changes that you might notice is in German, with a German accent, my name, Jenny, would turn into Chenny. So the J becomes a Ch. And Irish, think, as in th, becomes tink. I think that's all. So, great. Okay, let's move on. Let me ask Abner, are there any questions so far? This would be a good stopping point for some questions before we move on to the next section?
No, not at this point. We don't have any questions in the chat. People are certainly welcome to put in their questions or comments at any time. But right now, no, we don't have any anyone piping in.
Okay. If anyone has any questions about the 7 core vocal elements, feel free to ask right now, and you're certainly welcome at the end to ask. But we're going to move on to the 4 supporting vocal elements. So it's a good stopping place in case you do have any questions about what we just talked about.
Oh, Jenny, actually, I do have 2 that just popped on my screen.
Okay.
One is from Kathy asking about standard American and whether that's more like 30s and 40s movies, typically.
Oh, what a
And
great
yeah,
question. Yes. So could you go back one, please, Leah, just so we aren't distracted by new information? Yeah, so that's a great question. The standard American is not the same as the movie dialects that you heard in, like Betty Davis and that kind of thing, and those kinds of actors. That's called transatlantic, and it was a mixture of British and American, and that was also a constructed language for it was just a way to kind of make a standard for the film industry, but it had this eloquence to it. It had this kind of upper class elitism to it. And yeah, it was constructed basically of a little bit of British and a little bit of American. And so that's what's called the transatlantic accent. So fun to imitate, isn't it? It's like, oh, so we're all here and we're having a great time talking about deconstructing dialects, right? I love playing with that accent.
yes, Jenny. Arwen comments that she's heard it called Mid-Atlantic. Andrea also mentioned that it's called Transatlantic.
Yeah, transatlantic, mid-Atlantic, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And Danida, I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. Danida Feldman mentioned Cary Grant.
Yes, Cary Grant. That's absolutely the perfect example of a transatlantic accent because he was British. He was born in England, but he just had that. That was the quintessential, and also Katharine Hepburn. Those 2 spoke transatlantic, but a lot of them did. But those are 2 really good examples of it.
And Jill asks, why is it that when singers sing, no matter what dialect, they seem to sound just English?
Yeah. And that's a great question. And the reason why is because vowels and diphthongs lose their character when they're extended. So, if I'm saying home versus home, but that first element of the diphthong is lost because I'm actually ending up going to the O. So home, it's kind of lost that whole diphthong character. And so that's essentially why. You can still have a dialect and put on a dialect when you're singing, but it is watered down because you're extending all those vowels.
Absolutely. Then Arwen asks just now if we can have scripts at some point to practice different dialects, if that's something that is might be available as part of the workshop.
That's a lot. I would be happy to, like, I'm trying to think how we could do that. That might have to be another workshop, actually, Abner. Because if you have a specific question about maybe a character, feel free. I'm not sure there would be time to go over an actual script, though.
Well, what we should do is provide at least a way to contact you. People can reach out to you if they have individual requests or individual questions about something that they might be working on.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Certainly reach out if you have questions, and I have my contact information at the end. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure. I think maybe that was I think maybe I miscommunicate, or I didn't understand it, the question right. But yeah, if you have any specific questions about a character or something, then feel free. And then if you want to reach out further for further help, then please do.
Excellent. And I just want to remind folks that yes, there will be a link with a recording of today's workshop available to everyone that's registered. So be on the lookout for that. That will definitely be made available for you for a limited time. And that's about it for questions, at least at this moment. But again, if anything else comes in, feel free to, and I will definitely pass it on. Back
Okay.
to you, Jenny.
Sounds good. So yeah, if you still have questions about the 7 core vocal elements, we'll get those at the end. And I'll start talking now about the 4 supporting vocal elements. So the circle continues to get bigger. And at the very center, think of this as a big mouth. And you go from the very center with the vowels and the diphthongs all the way out to the individual person. Okay, so we're going to look through all these, but where we went from the outside circle in with the 7 core elements, we're going to start with the actually, how did I do that? Remind me. Let's see. We did the outside circle in. We're going to do the inside circle out for this next bit, and I'll explain why. So let's move on. All right, so the body is the physicality, the gestures, and the nonverbals. Now here's where we get into some weeds, a little bit of weeds, because are we going to say, oh, Irish dialect has this physicality and these gestures and these nonverbals? We can do that to some small generalized degree. We can't always do it with every single dialect, but I find that it is useful to look in terms of broadly, what does this culture tend to do physically? We can say pretty confidently that Finnish people are more reserved and Brazilian people are less reserved. So that's kind of what I'm talking about, is that there is a tendency to hold your body in certain ways in different cultures. And so I want to encourage you to think in terms of generalities. There's no judgment. I think that's the important thing, because it's not about, well, who does it right, right? It's just about what is the tendency? What is generally the way a culture does? What do they do with their bodies? And what kinds of gestures do they have? What kinds of nonverbals? Okay, so the body language, the movement, how a person walks, how they stand, how they hold their body, gestures such as hand or head movements that may support the speech, or nonverbal sounds with meaning. So I'd like all of you to maybe in the chat, go ahead and Abner, I want you to just kind of throw this out there as people put it in the chat. What are some gestures that you tend to use? Like, for instance, I use my hands a lot, but I use them a little bit randomly. So I'll kind of throw my hand here and that, and there's something very emotional and expressive in the way I use my hands. Maybe a sentence or two about how you tend to use your hands for gestures. And let's just take a minute and read a couple of them, Abner.
Sure. Andrea says lots of hand movements with tense fingers.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else?
Yes, just as these begin to come in. Let's see. I really hope I'm saying the name right. Danida says, I draw in the air with my hands. Love that. Pat says, whatever it is with the hands that conveys go figure. Leslie says that I am a flailer. Deanna says, last director said, stop all those movements.
Yes, interesting.
Yeah.
That's a really good segue into the next thing I'm going to say about this. I have seen a lot of really excellent actors over the years that retain their own gestures. And this is something that you may know exactly what I'm talking about. When you have to do a dialect, you may not retain your own gestures. And this is obvious. You can't do that for anybody, whether you're doing a dialect or not. You have to take on the gestures and the body of the person that you are, of the role that you have. But it is especially important with dialects and accents, because not only, and we'll get to this in a bit, but not only are you taking on the gestures and the body and the physicality of the person, you're taking it on of their culture too. And you have to start there. You have to start with the generalized, well, what does this culture do? Because we will get authentic and real and specific with it later. But for now, you have to just know, oh, I'm doing a Russian accent. What do they do in Russia? How do they hold their body? How do they move? Can I generalize? And you can usually find kernels of truth through the research that you do. So an example in British would be a stiff physicality because of the social structure and the images that they needed to carry over. Dynamic physicality with Brooklyn Italian because it's New York and it's a packed together. Everybody's packed together and people want their space, and there's this dynamic culture from the Italian influence. Thumbs up is a non-verbal that's pretty universal. You're going to find it in multiple cultures, but not all. And then the head wobble in India, which some of you may have seen, is a very specific. Yes, I think it doesn't exactly always mean yes. It can mean many things. Sometimes it means I hear you and I'm receiving what you're saying, but that is a very significant gesture if you're going to do an Indian accent. Okay, next. All right, the next one is nature. And this is the big one of all of them, as far as you could go on and on and on and on. This is the culture. You know, there's going to be a limit to the physicalities, but with culture, you could go down those rabbit holes. And this is where I encourage you to figure it out. Say, well, if I'm doing a play that takes place in Uganda, what's the culture of Ugandans and in specifically the Western Ugandan or Eastern Ugandan or wherever you are? This is the culture you're looking up. And so the customs, the traditions, the tendencies. And like, for instance, male circumcision is universal in many African countries, but not necessarily in Uganda. It's very common in North Africa and West Africa. It can be common in Uganda, but is it in the area that you're working on in Uganda? So it's you have to kind of know exactly what culture you're working with and hone in on what is the tradition of this specific character in this specific dialect, in this specific country, region, etc. So yeah, slurping ramen noodles as a guest in someone's home is a sign of respect in Japan. If you're playing a Japanese character, I don't even know if it would be in the script, but just knowing that is another layer to the culture of your character. And then Saturday, the Sabbath, is a religious holiday in many Jewish cultures. In Jewish culture, I think, why did I say many? Sorry, I think that was a typo. And so you want to just know, even if it's not necessarily going to be brought in to the play, the character, understanding that culture just brings that three-dimensionality and that depth that you need. Okay, next. All right, now the words. This is the actual specific vocabulary, the grammatical structure, idiomatic expressions, and unique pronunciations. So in Scottish, you would have, are you lost, wee lass? We is from Scots, which is actually a language. Some people would call it a dialect. It's actually really pretty much a language. So that's why we can't understand Scottish. You know, there's this big joke like, have you ever listened to Scottish, like Train Spotting? You can't understand it. Well, it's because they're literally speaking another language. So just know that, and it's English and Scots. There's so many different words in Scots that we might recognize, but we might not recognize. But we is very common, and whether they're speaking full-on Scots or they're speaking in English Scottish, we is a vocabulary that they use all the time for little or small. Australian coldie. So, would you like a coldie, mate? Come on, let's sit down and have a coldie together. Okay, so a lot of different vocabulary words in different dialects. British English, grammatical structure. Kate has just run to the store. So this is very, if I'm doing estuary, Kate has just run to the store. She'll be right back. So just, you know, just sit down and wait for her. And then Russian, they drop the articles. So the translation, the grammatical structure of the translation is important to know. Bring me book, instead of bring me the book. Will you bring me book? And that's a very common thing too. You'll find it's sometimes in translations where they don't know English very well, and they might be, the grammar might be shifted around. So you might have words in different places because their language is, they're trying to translate it into English and it doesn't quite work. And then idiomatic expressions. The devil is beating his wife. I don't know if anybody's from the South. They say that in the South. It's very common. It's a terrible idiomatic expression as far as I'm concerned, but it is a thing. And then they say oi in Britain. Oi, let's go. Let her talk. Okay, that is like a hey. In Canadian, they say process. We're probably all pretty aware of this. Process is how we say it in American. Process in Canadian. Project, what's the other one? Process, I just had it. There's 3 of them that are common. And then in British, vitamin is vitamin. So this is all kind of what we think about when we're learning a dialect. We think of, oh yeah, of course, there's different vocabulary and there's different pieces of this. This is different, obviously, than the vowels and the diphthongs, because those are the individual pronunciations of those words. These are the actual changes of words from General American to that dialect that are different. Okay, so that's the difference, and that's why it's out on the furthest outer circle. Okay, next one.
Hey, Jenny, I got a comment from Arwen, who is saying that that's precisely what she was referring to with practicing different dialects, that it has a lot for her to do with the vocabulary. So
Yes.
that no matter how good one's form or tone and shape you have, it may not sound authentic if you don't have the vocabulary. Does that make sense?
Yes, that's right. And certainly if you have your script, then it's going to be in there. The words that you need to change and speak are going to be in your script. But if you're doing an improv show, if you're doing something a little more casual or what have you, then you may need to create your own words and come up with your own vocabulary. So it's really important to keep that in mind. And that's the hard part. I mean, that's the part that I have to really stay on top of when I'm helping people with this kind of thing, because it's not always evident. It's a different dialect. And so therefore we don't know all these words. And so you have to research them for sure. Okay, so the self, this is the most important part. This is the role. Ultimately, you're stepping into the role of another human being. You are no longer you, you are another human being. And so that person, that role has to be unique. And this is where we go from the broad, hey, what does this culture do? How do they talk? How do they behave? What are their tendencies, etc., to say, but does this apply to my character? So it's the unique characteristics. These are the complex traits that give the role depth, three-dimensionality, but can sometimes even contradict the cultural tendencies. Okay, so I mean, this is the nature of theater. You're going to have contradictions and conflict. So it's inevitable that your character is going to have something that doesn't jive with the culture that they're in. That's quite often what you'll find. For an example, a character who grew up in Japan but moved to the American South as a young adult. Let's say they're in their 60s. How are they going to sound? Are they going to have a Japanese accent? Probably not. It's going to be a mix of Japanese and Southern, but maybe it's pure Southern because maybe that person consciously decided to get rid of their Japanese accent. So it depends on that person. Who is your character? And you may have to decide yourself these changes. You may have to you and the director and the vocal coach may have to say, well, who's this person and would they be speaking in this dialect? And if so, to what degree? And I think that that's where you sort of have this spectrum of to what degree. But the thing is that what does that mean? That's where we start getting into what is called dialect design. So then you start to say, well, here's the dialect that I've learned. All the sound changes, the vowels, the diphthongs, the consonants, all of those shapes and connectors. How do I change them? And in what way do I change them? Do I say, if I'm doing Irish, do I say think? So if I know in Irish, think turns to tink. I think you're right. What if my character, you decide, they're not going to have a thick Dublin Irish accent. So we're going to drop the T. We're going to drop that rule. And they're going to say think. I think you're right. I think you're right. So there's a dialect design for that character. You've decided consciously, intentionally to drop that one rule because it fits who that individual character is. That's what dialect design is, okay? And that's what it comes down to. The outer circle is the ultimate goal. Everything in between, we're going from, well, like I said, the inner circle is the large to the small, then the outer circle is small to large, but it all fits in together as part of your work in learning that dialect.
Hey, Jenny,
all right, are there any questions?
Jenny,
Yeah.
Arwen also mentions that she loves to use accent tags on YouTube to help with dialects.
Yes.
This helps one decide more details about the character.
Oh, yeah, that's a great resource for sure, because these are going to be people who are living that dialect. And so, what I've found with them, the only thing you have to be careful of is sometimes people don't have a thick accent. It's more about the vocabulary with the accent tags. It's more the phrasing and the vocabulary, and they only have like one specific list, which can be very helpful if you want to compare. So if you're comparing Scotland to Ireland, you're going to have different pronunciations for sure with those same words, unless there's a different accent tag that I'm thinking of. Is this the one where they have the same list of words? And they're-
I'm not sure. I'm not certain.
Yeah.
It sounds like it though, yeah.
It started as that. It did. Yeah. Oh, okay. And it changed.
Mhm.
Yeah. So for sure. And you just have to do your research and you have to really know where to go. The international, you know what, the one thing I forgot to do was include the links to a couple of really good resources, and I'm going to have to find that for you, but let me do that at the end when and I can include that. Let's keep going unless there are some more questions about the 4 supporting vocal elements.
No, looks like we're okay. We can move forward.
Okay, let's keep going then. All right, so brings us to designing a dialect. It all comes down to the self, like I said. You want to look at all of these. You want to individually study and work on and research all of these, but it comes down to that individual character. Again, you're going to discard some things. You're going to say, nope, not doing that. I'm not doing that version of Brooklyn, Italian, New York for this character. It's just not, it doesn't apply to this individual. But you have a starting point. You have a place to start. And that's kind of your fulcrum around which you revolve. And if you start with the generalized version of the standard dialect, then you have a place to go. You know where to start. And when you end up with your character. So what I recommend when designing the dialect is to grab a notebook and just write it all down. And you can do it online as well. I mean, do a digital notebook, whatever works for you, and just get each of these categories, each of these vocal elements, kind of capture each of the topics so that you have them in one place. And then by the time you get to self, it'll evolve into something a little bit more 3-dimensional and real. Okay, let's go to the next slide. All right, so here's the process. Here's how it works. This is the schedule, or sort of the order in which you should do it. As soon as you are cast, you get the email, the call, whatever it is, and you start learning that dialect. You learn the 7 core vocal elements, and you immediately start drilling the individual sound changes, which would be the vowels, the diphthongs, the connectors, the shapes. And then you also start researching the 4 supporting vocal elements. Then, as soon as you have your script, I mean, you're working on all of this, as soon as you have the role, then as soon as you get your script, start analyzing the script for the words. And then immediately start to apply the shapes and the connectors. So you got your words, you see, oh, okay, I know the rule for British RP. Ask becomes ask. Let's look for all of the ask words that change. And you're going to mark that up and make those changes. Then in early rehearsals, you're going to start to adjust the dialect to match yourself as this role. That's when you work with the director and the vocal coach. You're going to be working with the director and the vocal coach long before the early rehearsals, but you're really going to start to make those changes and say, oh, no, this character would not say that. This would be more of a kind of halfway in between accent, et cetera, et cetera. They would have a very thick accent. So I really want to dial up the sounds. That's what happens in the early rehearsals, is deciding exactly who this person is and exactly what they will be speaking. Now, when you start to get to the point that you're memorizing, blocking, and working on your character, you really need to have, at that point, you know who that person is, right? This is when you start to bring the dialect to life. this is where you gradually start to let go of the technical work. Not yet, but you're really starting to let go of it, and it's starting to become ingrained by memorization, blocking, and character study. By tech or dress, it is time to truly let go and let the dialect have its own life. If you're really kind of drilling sound changes and learning all the little pieces and still looking up what the culture of that character is, it's too late. You have to let it breathe by tech or dress. During the run, it's okay to make corrections in moderation, because you're going to get notes, right? You're going to get notes. And so you're going to need to make those corrections. And depending on whether there's a vocal coach, depending on whether the director is very interested in the speech piece, because some directors are totally into speech and some are not as interested, got to deal with those notes. And also for you, if you're noticing glaring mistakes, make those corrections, but only in moderation, because you can't afford to be drilling down on your dialect during a run. You need to stay in the moment, stay with your character. Post run, however, right away, make sure that you debrief what worked and what didn't work with the dialect. Note it, get it down, record it, just do like a 10-minute recording of you blabbing, oh, this worked, that didn't work, and then take a big old break and then come back to it and say, okay, that's done. And instead of saying, well, I just finished British RP, I doubt I'll get another role in British RP for a long time, it's okay. Keep working on it. Find some time, carve out time in your training to say, this is dialect work time. And I'm going to go back to those things that didn't work in my role with the British RP, and I'm going to work on those, because you never know when the next time you're going to do British RP is. Okay. Not to mention, it's skill building. It helps you learn the skill of using your voice, of analyzing scripts, of interpreting characters, of living the character. It's all skill building. And the last slide. Yeah, so this is how you can reach me right now. I am having a website built. I'm kind of off grid right now, and I'm going to be getting on social media. I'm sort of brand new to social media. It's so scary. It's kind of sad, but it's going to change soon. But for now, I can only be reached via email because my website is not done yet. And if you are interested, I am doing a series of classes on teaching dialects. It's called the Dialect Salon, and it is a 3-class series. So I encourage you to come to all 3 if you're interested. We're going to do Cockney and the modern British, the estuary British. And it's going to be February 19th, the 20th. So we do 2 in one weekend, and then we do the 3rd one on the second week. And what it is in class 1, we learn the dialects. So we learn the basics, everything. And then the next day, at the end of the weekend, we drill. So we'll drill what we just learned, and we do fun games and group activities. Right now it's all virtual. And then the following week on Saturday again, we do the conversation class, and it's really an immersion class. And what you do is you show up, and now you've had a week to practice. We just talk in the dialect the whole time. And it's usually a theme. Last time we did it, we did British RP, and we did trivia as a theme. And so I don't know what the theme will be for this one, but you just show up, you practice, we have fun, we play games, and it's really an exercise in bravery, because you just have to do it. You just have to come and show up. And I'm coaching you the whole time. It'll be kind of a party atmosphere, but I will also coach you a little bit and kind of make sure that you're not just going off the deep end. So that's the Dialect Salon. If you're interested, please just email me. I don't have an automated system yet, but I will soon. And if you also need to reach me for any other questions or for private sessions, then feel free as well to reach out. Are there any other questions?
Yeah, I'm just going over the chat here for you, Jenny.
Okay, and I'm going to look up those resources too and send them to Leah.
Danita mentions, and then you watch EastEnders.
What's that?
Yeah, Danita mentions, and then after all that, you watch EastEnders.
You watch lots and lots of EastEnders, like my mum on BritBox.
Oh yeah. And then you start talking like that, right?
Oh, absolutely, darling.
Exactly.
This is a great class. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm looking up some resources right now, so I'm going to be briefly distracted while I'm looking those up. There's just two major sites, or actually three, that you guys should know about. And, but are there any other questions while I'm doing that? Actually, that's not going to work. You know what I'm going to have to do is get back to you guys because it's just really slow. So will that work, Leah, if I just, or Abner, if I just email you those resources?
That's not a
Yeah.
problem.
We can get that out to everybody.
We can get that out to everyone. We do have a survey, kind of a post-workshop survey, and included in that, we'll include any other links or information that we can pass along for all of you to enjoy. But this has been terrific. I hope you'll all join me in waving your hands and saying thank you to Jenny for a terrific, boy, this session breezed by, and it's been terrific. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for coming. I really appreciate your time and hope you can join us at the Dialect Salon.
Wonderful, wonderful. We're going to hang out for a few more minutes if anybody wants to chime in with any individual questions. If Jenny can and hang around for a few more minutes.
Yeah.
Other than that, we will let you go in the interest of time. Thank you all for being here, and we'll see you on the next CTG workshop.
I'm so crushed, Jenny. You left out V.
I left out what?
V, as in the voiced consonants. And my voice teacher.
Oh, I left out V, of course. Well, I should have, right? Because of a voice. You would think, right? Thank you for pointing that out.
Can we get copies of the PowerPoint?
Is that, would that be for me, or how does that?
There'll be a link available for the whole workshop, including the PowerPoint. For a limited time, we'll be sending that link out available to everyone who's registered. So yes.
So we can print it out from there. So I think if I understand your question, Julie, you want like an actual copy of the PowerPoint, correct?
I want to be able to print
with Jenny's permission, I have a PDF version that we can make available to participants, but it's only if Jenny is okay with it, since it's her material, it's her course material.
Yeah.
Yes. So did you say, Leah, what did you say, that you would just put that, attach that, or how would that work?
What we would do is basically take the PowerPoint we used, we can save that as a PDF, kind of like what you had done before. And then anyone who registered for the workshop, we can send them an email with that document, if that's okay with you, since it's your property.
That's fine. Yeah. If you, what I would say is, if you would like a copy, just let Leah know. And, those of you that are requesting it specifically are welcome to have it. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll put
Make
the
sure you copyright it, Jenny. Make sure you copyright it, please.
Yeah, it's on there.
I'm going to put in the Colorado Theater Guild email address in here. So if anyone has requests for stuff regarding the workshop, it can all go in there and it won't get lost. Workshop.
Andrea asked if there was a fee for your salon.
Pardon me?
And Andrea asked if there was a fee for the salon.
Yes, it's $25 per class.
Groovy.
And you're going to be working on English and
Cockney and estuary English. Like what Danida?
Danita.
You're speaking estuary, I believe.
Sort of.
I can't.
It's estuary with 40 years of living in Colorado.
Okay, so but to our ears, that's what estuary is. It's basically just modern British.
It's like taking up out the sludge of the Thames, yeah.
Yeah, yes, that's right. That's right. It's like it sounds so elegant to us, but not to you. To hear that word estuary, right?
Yeah, it's like, okay, it's taking out the mud, yeah.
Yep, that's where it came from, and it's so
very cool. No, this was really fun. Thank you so much. I'm fascinated with all the nuts and bolts. As I'm a narrator, I do books on tape and storytelling, and so
wonderful.
Yeah, I do a lot of this naturally, but knowing sort of the dynamics that underlie it, that's very cool. Thank you.
Yes. Oh, you're welcome.
Bye.
Bye,
Julie.
Julie. Thank you.
Bye,
Thank you,
everybody.
Danita.
Have a good
Bye,
night.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you
for
so
setting
much.
this up.
Bye-bye. Have a good night.
Bye.
been great.
So long, folks.
Cheers.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
this has been great, and I need to. I want to go to that salon, because the thing is, over the years, I started acting when I was a child, and I actually was in The King and I and played a little child from Siam. I had a very dark tan that summer and real long dark hair. But the thing is, there are so many dialects now that I cannot even go out for those parts.
Oh,
That is not part of my history. So I have to basically concentrate on the European and English and Irish and Scotch, and even the Scandinavian, because even though I might not look it ethnically, I am 1/4 Swedish. And I would love to learn how to do a really good Swedish accent, because my great grandmother, who I used to do it, I pick up accents fairly easily. I've lived in all parts of the country. I'm from Chicago originally, and when I go back to my family, I talk like them. But I would pick up accents as I moved across the country, and then go back. I was moving from Maryland to Illinois during one part of my life, and there's a definite kind of a, I don't know, East Coast Maryland accent, and I'd go back, and the first couple of days I'm back in Illinois, people would say, "You talk funny." And when I first got to Maryland, people said I talk funny, you know. So, but I mean,
our perspectives are all different.
Yeah. Well, I was in, stuff. I was in college. I was in Tea House of the August Moon. I would never be cast in something like that. And I did Oriental makeup and, different things like that. But I would, nowadays that's out.
Yeah.
You can't do, so I want to concentrate on the ones that are part of my heritage that I could possibly use.
Absolutely. Yes.
And
that's the way we're doing it now.
Yeah. When I was in West Side Story, nobody, I played a Puerto Rican. I don't have it, nowadays that is not done.
Yeah.
Because, and I'm not saying I criticize, I think that's great. But I was, a lot of this stuff, my early theater was in a very small town in the middle of Illinois.
Yeah.
You didn't really have any ethnic people, they all looked, they were all like me. So you had to cast people and do makeup and do accents and things because, there weren't any you know, in our theater group, maybe they didn't try out, I don't know, but there weren't, you know, for tea house, there weren't Oriental people in the neighborhood or even trying out. So we had to be that.
Yeah.
And the same for West Side Story. There was nobody in my high school class that was Puerto Rican. So some of us had to be the Puerto Ricans.
Right.
And it was usually the ones that weren't blonde.
Mm-hmm.
Which I don't know if that's even really realistic.
They do it. They still do it, though. I think that, you know, I don't think it's come to the point where they don't cast someone if, you know, like if they're not Puerto Rican, they're still going to cast them if they look it.
Mhm.
But yeah, because of wigs and stuff like that. But you're right. I mean, it's changing a lot.
Well, I can remember even because I'm an old movie buff anyway, but I've been watching old movies since I was very small. And the only one that always offended me was Charlie Chan. His kids were played, the kids that were hired, his sons, were always Oriental. But Charlie Chan was always a white guy that they typed his eyes up.
Oh, yeah.
And I was, you know, when I started, because I'm a big mystery buff too. And when I first started, I said, that's not right. Why can't they, you know, actually hire a Chinese actor to play Charlie Chan? I think that, you know, as I said, I was in my teens and that was the first time I was kind of aware of, wait, this isn't right. Or even some of the old Westerns.
Oh God, it was rampant back then.
Natalie Wood played an Indian, you know.
Yeah, no, it was
Native American. You know, I mean, and as I said, I'm sorry. I'm not going to talk anymore. But anyway, you know, I'm glad there are now more people of different ethnicities that are being able to play a part of who they are.
Yeah. That's good. And that directors have plays that are showcasing characters that, you know, so that more of a variety of actors are able to experience something that they're right for, their parts are appropriate for.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Kathy. And thanks, everybody. I see Ron is still with us. And I think that's about it. But we're